You might remember a video I did not too long ago about Alex Belfield and 2 further orders made against him by the court. If you're not familiar with Alex Belfield, I'll link another video in the description below and you can go and hear about the case there. But the more attentive and alert among you will remember that I also did a video teasing an exclusive about Alex Belfield on my channel, again not too long ago, that didn't happen. So apologies for that, but sometimes life and work happen all at the same time and we just don't get time to do these things. So in this video, the exclusive on what was not ordered by the court against Alex Belfield, so stay tuned. Welcome back to the channel. So as I said, if you want to hear more about what happened previously, I will link a few videos in the description below. But let's get into what actually happened at that hearing. Now, before we get into the detail, what happens at a court is you're going to court and asking the court to make a decision. Whether that's for money, whether it's an order to do or not do something, either way, you're asking the court to make a decision. And people go along and they make arguments either for themselves or they send legal representatives. And if necessary, the court will hear evidence and then ultimately the court will make a decision. And the court, by the way, includes a jury in the case of a criminal trial when you're asking the court, essentially the Crown is asking the court or a private prosecutor is asking the court to make a decision, guilty or not guilty, of the defendant charged with a crime. However, in this video, we're talking about non-monetary, non-criminal orders in the form of certain restraining orders. Now, what often happens, speaking generally for a moment, is when one side seeks a list of different things for the court to order, the court may not be minded to order all of them. And outside court, beforehand, this is why parties are always routinely ordered and required to attend court an hour before a hearing, that is to discuss and to try to resolve matters and issues before going into court, so that they can come to an agreement on certain things before putting them before the court. Give you an example. If a separating couple are going to court over a child arrangements order and they haven't yet worked things out, each party will be required to attend court an hour before so that they can discuss things and hopefully come to some agreement and some resolution as to what those arrangements will be, so that the court's intervention is going to be much more limited in nature. So then the court will only have to make a decision on 1 or 2 things as opposed to everything. But sometimes that doesn't work out, and the court is tasked with making a decision on absolutely everything, including just FaceTime calls and all sorts of stuff. Weekend contact, you name it. Sometimes the court is tasked with making all of those decisions because parents just don't agree. As an aside, if you do find yourself in that situation, I always recommend that it's better for parents to discuss it with each other, draw up a parenting plan and agree to it, even file it by consent with the court. At least you're in control of what happens and you're not told what to do by the court. However, the point of all that is this. One party may seek a list of things and may only end up with 1 or 2 of them, but they are sometimes more likely to end up with 1 or 2 of them if they drop some of the others. For example, if you are bringing a counterclaim along with your defense, it might be beneficial to the other side to agree to certain things with you. For example, if you drop your counterclaim, they might just drop part of their claim against you as the defendant. In a criminal sense, this is sometimes referred to as plea bargaining. For example, a defendant might agree to plead to a lesser offence, which is obviously much less severe in terms of sentencing. So what we have here is potentially a case where a whole list of things were sought against Alex Belfield, and the court only ordered 1 or 2 of them. In fact, 2 of them, which were detailed in my previous video, which I'll link in the description below. However, there were 3 other orders sought by the prosecutor that were not ordered by the court because the prosecutor decided not to pursue those at that hearing. Now, let's have a brief look at what each of those were and consider the impact that that might have had on Alex Belfield or any individual against whom such an order was made. And for those that are not familiar, this case had an intrinsic link with the BBC. Now, this video, just as a disclaimer, is a neutral explanation of what happened. I am neither supporting Alex Belfield, nor am I supporting the BBC. You know me better than that by now. I tell you what happened as factually as I can possibly do so with the information and the sources that I have, and explain it as to how the law applies in given situations. So this is what was sought and generally how that might apply in a general sense. So the first of those that was sought, that was not ordered, was not to have any contact with any employee of the BBC. Now, that might be quite a difficult task for anybody to achieve, including Alex Belfield. Alex Belfield, as was recognised by the court as a journalist, might have to have contact with another journalist at some point, who may, in some sense or another, be employed by the BBC. Now, looking at some statistics might help to conceptualise this a little bit. The BBC, for those that don't know, is the British Broadcasting Corporation. It is a huge organisation, both in the UK and worldwide, has many hundreds of millions of viewers worldwide, and, of course, has tens of thousands of employees. In fact, looking at the group annual report for 21-22, it reports that as of the 31st of March, there were 21,252 employees at the BBC. Looking at other statistics elsewhere, not vouching for their accuracy, report that there are now over 23,000 employees at the BBC. So taking a rough number of anything between 21 and 23,000 people as employed by the BBC group, average full-time equivalents. So thinking about that for a moment, the order sought by the prosecutor was not to have contact with any employee of the BBC. Any contact at all. So that could mean even passing in the street and saying hello. And of course, having worked for the BBC for many years, Alex Belfield may know many people at the BBC, and as working as a journalist thereafter, and after his ultimate release from prison, may continue, he may not, but he may continue to work as a journalist afterwards, and of course, in any sense, may come across someone who is employed by the BBC. So that is quite a broad and far-reaching order if it were made as a restraining order against him, which obviously, if any contact were made either in the street or over coffee or email or Twitter or any form of contact whatsoever, then Alex Belfield would have been back in court for breach of that restraining order if that were so ordered. But as I said, that was one of three that the prosecutors sought not to pursue at that hearing, presumably in favour of securing the first two, which again I've explained in a different video, so you can go and check that out if you wish. The second of the three orders sought, which was not ordered by the court, was not to enter any BBC premises. Now, again, for those of you that are not familiar, even if you are familiar with the BBC, you may not be familiar with how many buildings there are. Even I wasn't really familiar with how many buildings there are. Having looked it up on Wikipedia for what it's worth, Wikipedia is generally a reasonable source of information. Not saying that it's absolute gospel, so don't start shooting me up in the comments there. But having a look at current properties listed on the BBC, this is presumably managed and maintained by a number of people that know what they're talking about. There is a lengthy list of buildings. Now, one of the things to note here is that these buildings are not necessarily entirely BBC buildings. There may be some buildings that house both the BBC and others. For example, the intrinsic links with ITV. Now, I'm no expert on this, so generally that's one thing to consider. So there's this long list of buildings in London. There is then England outside of London. I like how Wikipedia distinguishes London and everything outside of London, as many people do. And again, there's a long list of buildings here, many of which may, such as there's a civic centre, there's Claremont House. I don't know these buildings personally, but just as a guess, I would say that some of these may house something other than just the BBC. There's a whole long list of buildings here. Then we've got Northern Ireland, then we've got Scotland, Wales, and then obviously abroad, and a long list of buildings abroad. But all of these buildings abroad, right across the United States and in other countries, many of which may, as I say, not just house the BBC, but may house others as well. So as a journalist, I would think that that would be quite a far-reaching restraining order to not go into any of those buildings anywhere in the world that is a BBC building. But as I say, that is another one of these orders that was not pursued by the prosecutor at that hearing and therefore was not ordered by the court. I think had the court gone on to consider that, it may have been quite a difficult task to persuade the court to make such an order because of how broad that order would be. Of course, I cannot speak for the judge, but arguments would have been made both for and against that order. Finally, and this is if that wasn't broad enough, the final order that was not ordered by the court and not pursued by the prosecutor at that hearing was an order not to stalk any person. Now, of course, stalking is an offence, and it is defined. I've defined this in other videos, which I will also link in the description below, so I don't go through over old ground again and again. But to stalk a person is ultimately amounting to a course of conduct causing alarm and distress. And as I say, you can see my other videos for a more in-depth explanation of what it is. But to seek this as an order not to stalk any person would be obviously akin to a super injunction of don't do this to any person, anywhere, anytime. Now, that would leave absolutely anyone, anytime, anywhere in the world open to accuse Alex Belfield of stalking behaviour and therefore be brought back to court to argue for and against whether that part of a restraining order has been broken. Now, of course, in considering that, if the court did go on to consider that, the court would have to consider the implications on the limitations of freedom or prospect of career afterwards, considering that Alex Belfield will doubtless pursue some line of journalism afterwards. At least that's my guess, because that's what he's always done. Now, if someone were to do anything like that, and let's say in the line of investigative journalism, and somebody were to complain that they were being stalked in some kind of investigative journalism piece, then that would doubtless bring the case back to court for a further argument of a breach of the restraining order, and the court's time would be taken up, and of course costs on both sides would escalate. So again, this would be a very wide order if it were ordered by the court, but again, that was the third and final order, as I understand it, that was not ordered by the court, which was not sought by the prosecution. So as I said, that is the exclusive bit that I don't think you've heard anywhere else of what really happened in court. And to summarize, prior to the hearing, the prosecution accepted that the third, fourth, and fifth of these orders originally sought would not be pursued at the hearing, and the court would only proceed to consider the first two. So I hope you found that interesting. Doubtless there will be further comments and questions from you, but apologies once again that this was later than originally expected, but please do hit that like button and subscribe. And as always, thank you so much for watching.